The Justice Center for Constitutional Freedoms, a nonprofit, public interest national law firm, reports Crown Prosecutors are continuing to withdraw tickets issued to its clients for supposed violations of public health orders. The Justice Center represents close to 100 individuals who have been ticketed for supposedly breaching public health orders in BC, Alberta, Saskatchewan, and Ontario for allegedly participating in peaceful protests, not wearing a mask, providing services during lockdowns, not complying with public health guidelines on signage, and other issues surrounding charter freedoms. So far, all COVID-related tickets issued to rally demonstrators in Alberta, represented by the Justice Center, have been withdrawn by Crown Prosecutors before trial.
We right now are exercising our charter freedoms, our fundamental rights and freedoms, our freedom of expression, our freedom of peaceful assembly, our freedom of association. We're in dark times because it seems that our mayor, our city councillors, our premier, our MLAs, our prime minister, the chief medical officers seem to have forgotten about our charter rights and freedoms. Under the Canadian Charter of Rights and Freedoms, a government, whether federal, provincial, municipal, a government can only violate freedoms temporarily in a narrow fashion to deal with a crisis, and there are restrictions and limitations on those violations. When we were told in March that there was a virus that was going to kill millions of people around the world, and not just people in their 80s and 70s and 90s, but it was going to kill lots of young people, it was going to inflict permanent lung damage on huge numbers of young people. Do you remember that? Millions of people were going to get killed, and this was a threat to everybody, not just seniors. It was a threat to everybody. It was going to overwhelm the healthcare system. Remember that? We were just doing this temporarily to flatten the curve. And they said one thing in March that was actually true. They said, we cannot stop a virus from making its way through society. That was one piece of truth that was said in March, right? Remember that? It's like, we can't stop the virus. We're just trying to control the spread. We're just trying to slow it down. We got to flatten the curve. We got to make sure the hospitals are not being overwhelmed. So I heard that and I thought, well, sounds reasonable to me. You know, if you go onto the website of the Justice Center, www.jccf.ca, and you look at our news releases, you're not going to find any news releases in March that were denouncing the lockdowns, because at that time, it seemed like a reasonable proposition to have a temporary shutdown for 2 weeks, not to stop the virus entirely, because back then we seemed to know that you cannot do that. I mean, name me one example of one country, one province, one civilization in history that has ever succeeded in completely stopping a virus. I mean, it's impossible. And they said in March it's impossible to stop the virus entirely. But here's an even more important point. Even if these lockdowns have saved lives, for which there's no evidence, the onus is on politicians under the Charter. When you violate our freedom to move, our freedom to travel, our freedom to associate, our freedom to assemble, our freedom to worship, when you violate those rights and freedoms, the onus is on the government to show that those measures are actually doing more good than harm, and they have not met that onus.
Ryan Audette is a Calgary man who was issued a $50 ticket at the end of November for allegedly not wearing a mask in a public premise. Mr. Audette was attending a peaceful protest against lockdowns. Calgary police officers showed up afterwards at his house.
So the first ticket is you weren't wearing a mask inside a public premise, or it was outside of a
I wasn't indoors.
premise. Okay.
So is there a law to wear a mask in the outdoors?
You're in a public premise where any person had access to. It's a park area at the time.
So is there a law that I must wear a mask in an outdoor setting?
Yeah, municipal bylaw 26M 2020. It's written on the ticket here. Fine is $50.
An estimated 1,000 people were at the rally in downtown Calgary. Trevor Maher was issued a $1,200 ticket under the Public Health Act after getting off a C train and noticing a protest rally on December 19th in downtown Calgary. He saw the large crowd and decided to make a spur-of-the-moment decision and go and listen. Calgary police officers subsequently ticketed Mr. Maher $1,200 under the Public Health Act for allegedly contravening an order of the medical officer of health.
So here I am, downtown Calgary, and those guys off in the distance in those white vans, they just stepped out of their van as I was walking up to the rally, and they gave me a $1,200 ticket. A $1,200 ticket, which I explained was actually standing up against tyranny and dictatorship. This is Canada in 2020, and Canada 2021 is going to be even worse if we continue to let this happen. People have to stand up, people have to draw the line and say enough is enough.
Bernie Dreiger is a primary care paramedic who was issued a $1,200 ticket on December 22nd for not wearing a mask while buying a turkey and ham in a small co-op grocery store in Lacrete, Alberta. Mr. Dreiger thinks he was photographed by a nosy out-of-towner going around town taking photos because the majority of people in the town refused to wear masks. He thinks the photo was then sent into the provincial snitch line. Mr. Dreiger says he has lost trust in his fellow citizens and has since moved out of the community. He received a 3-day suspension from work when the photograph was made public. Trevor Simpson is a Calgary man who was ticketed $1,200 for allegedly not practicing safe social distancing at a lockdown protest in Calgary on Boxing Day. He says police waited until he was 3 blocks away from the rally and alone. He was then blocked by 4 Calgary police officers on bicycles.
Public health officials are not the supreme law of the land. The Constitution is. A significant portion of the arbitrary and confusing public health orders which have so oppressed Canadian society are, on their face, unconstitutional and cannot be justified. As a result, many of the tickets issued for the supposed violation of such orders will never be prosecuted. We expect the mass withdrawal of COVID tickets to continue as prosecutors across the country correctly decide to stay charges.